The silent ambush soldiers were ordered never to teach again. Lost World War II trap that shook armies and changed survival forever. Some weapons vanish not because they failed, but because they worked too well. During World War II, military archives hid an invention so effective, so psychologically devastating, that both Allied and Axis forces agreed it should never be taught again. It didn't explode, it didn't shoot, it whispered. A silent ambush that could cripple entire patrols with a single misstep. This was the Step Snare, a crude, handmade trap that turned the ground itself into the enemy. The story of the Step Snare isn't just about a weapon erased from history. It's about the raw genius of survival. It's about how ordinary people, stripped of resources, outsmarted professional armies using nothing but instinct, physics, and courage. And what's wild? The lessons hidden inside this forbidden tactic still hold the power to protect lives today, ethically, safely, and smartly. When soldiers in the 1940s marched through forests or tall grass, the last thing they trusted was the silence. Resistance fighters in occupied territories, France, Poland, the Philippines, had no guns, no mines, and no factories. What they had was creativity and desperation. They needed something that didn't require ammo, but could stop an enemy cold. Their answer was terrifyingly simple. A shallow pit disguised with leaves, twigs, and dirt. Beneath that cover lay a sharpened stake, sometimes bamboo, sometimes wood, angled upward. When a boot pressed down, the cover gave way just enough for the leg to fall through. The result wasn't instant death, it was immobilization. That's what made it powerful. One wounded soldier demanded medical attention. His squad stopped. The mission slowed. Fear rippled through the ranks. The Step Snare wasn't just a trap, it was a psychological weapon. Soldiers started questioning every step they took. The forest stopped being a path and became a battlefield of uncertainty. By 1947, every reference to step snares and similar ground denial traps vanished from Allied engineering manuals. They were labeled inhumane and unfit for standard instruction. But truthfully, they were too effective for comfort. World War II wasn't just fought with bullets. It was fought with beliefs. The belief that your next step was safe. The belief that the ground beneath you was solid. The Step Snare shattered those illusions. Military psychologists studying battlefield behavior later classified these devices as psychological choke points, weapons that inflicted fear completely disproportionate to their cost or size. Once the rumor spread that the ground itself could kill, movement slowed dramatically. Whole squads hesitated, scanning the soil instead of advancing. And that pause, just a few seconds of hesitation, could change the outcome of an ambush. That's why both sides banned it, not out of mercy, but because the fear it created couldn't be controlled. What made the Step Snare legendary wasn't its brutality. It was its design intelligence. It exploited two universal truths. Humans trust the ground they walk on, and they always choose the path of least resistance. That psychology is still relevant today. Understanding how people move through terrain is the foundation of modern survival strategy, home defense, and even architecture. The principle is not to harm, but to control the environment. For example, modern survivalists use gravel paths or dry leaves around their property so no one can approach silently. Uneven terrain, angled entryways, or choke points can channel intruders towards safe, visible areas. It's the same logic that resistance fighters used, minus the danger. The point isn't violence, it's awareness. Resistance fighters during World War II didn't have access to industrial materials. They built traps from what nature offered: bamboo, vines, moss, and soil. They studied erosion patterns, so their snares blended seamlessly into the environment. Nothing shiny, nothing new, nothing out of place. That's not just fieldcraft, that's mastery of observation. It's a survival skill that modern preppers often overlook. The ability to see the land not as decoration, but as a living system that can protect or expose you. Even today, the same visual discipline can make a difference. If you're protecting supplies or building a root cellar, mimic your surroundings. Use local colors, natural textures, and avoid anything that looks man-made. The principle hasn't changed in 80 years. The best defenses are the ones no one notices. After the war ended, Allied and Axis engineers sat on opposite sides of victory, but both agreed to bury this knowledge. Manuals were purged, field notes disappeared, the concept of the step snare was reclassified as restricted. But soldiers talk, and in the quiet decades after the war, veterans who had served as sappers, scouts, and engineers began teaching a different kind of lesson. Not how to build traps, but how to think. They taught adaptability, resourcefulness, the art of turning the environment into a tool. Those ideas shaped Cold War survival manuals, which started to focus on terrain control, environmental defense, and movement psychology. The trap itself died, but its logic, its raw, stripped-down survival intelligence became part of modern preparedness. Here's where history flips. The same terrain tricks once used to slow soldiers are now used to save lives. Disaster response teams and rescue units still use the same instincts, just in reverse. They identify unstable ground, mark dangerous zones, and design safe routes by studying how people naturally move through space. The line between a deadly trap and a safe path lies entirely in intent. And that's what makes the step snare's legacy worth remembering. It's not about the trap. It's about understanding the relationship between movement and the environment. When you can read terrain, when you can predict how someone will move, you control the situation. In survival, that control is everything. The step snare may be gone from history books, but the wisdom it carried is timeless. It reminds us that, technology doesn't make a survivor, thinking does. The people who built these traps weren't soldiers with budgets or blueprints. They were everyday civilians armed with awareness, patience, and the courage to adapt. They didn't wait for help. They became the help. That mindset, resourceful, observant, unstoppable, is what true preparedness is built on. Whether you're off-grid, in a city, or simply looking to protect what matters, the lesson is the same. The most powerful survival tool you'll ever have is understanding your environment. Control the ground, and you control the outcome. The silent ambush may have been erased from military manuals, but its lessons endure. Quiet, timeless, waiting to be rediscovered. If you want more stories like this, real survival wisdom forged on the front lines of history, subscribe to Wisdom from the Frontlines and share this with someone who values the lost knowledge of World War II. Because the past isn't dead, it's just buried, and every story we uncover brings its wisdom back to life.